அனைவருக்கும் வணக்கம். Now we'll see about the CCS CCA rules 1965. Central Civil Services Classification, Control and Appeal Rules 1965. It has come into effect on the 1st December 1965. These rules are applicable to all central government servants holding civil post included in civil service, and also applicable to general central service members, that is government servants holding the posts under general central service. These rules shall not apply to the members of All India Service, railway servants, railway employees, persons in the casual employment, and the government servants who are liable to be discharged at a notice of less than 1 month, and all other specified classes of employees specially declared to be excluded from this operation of these rules by the competent authority, that is President of India. Next, we must understand clearly the interpretation, that is definitions of some terms as specified in Rule 2, especially 2A and 2G. It will be very interesting to note the rationale behind the definitions. 2A defines the appointing authority, interprets the word appointing authority in relation to a government servant, not with reference to any post. You should note it clearly. Appointing authority in relation to a government servant to whom these rules are applicable. That is, the authority which is empowered to make appointments to the service in which the government servant is for the time being included, or the authority which is empowered to make appointments to the grade in which the government servant is for the time being included, or the authority which is competent to make appointments to the post which the government servant for the time being holds, or the authority which actually appointed that government servant in the post, grade or service, or when the government servant has been in continuous employment and is permanent employee, then that authority which appointed him to that service, post or grade. Out of these authorities, whichever authority is the highest authority, that authority is defined as the appointing authority to the respective government servant. Should not with reference to the post, with reference to the particular government servant. I can explain it by examples. We will refer to our, that means that is I refer to our department means our friends, postal employees. So I am Department of Post employee. I am retired Group A officer, STS grade officer. So I want to give example with reference to the Department of Post. The erstwhile Post and Telegraph Department, now the Department of Post, is the appointing authority for a clerical official, postal assistant in a division. We say Mr. X is a clerk, that is postal assistant in a particular division. Who is the appointing authority to him? That is the question. You should not consider the post and the appointing authority for the post. For that post of clerk, postal assistant, the appointing authority is divisional head, maybe a SPOs grade officer or SSPOs grade officer, Group B or Group A, divisional head. But in the case of that particular government servant, you should take all the authorities as per the definition. You might have first entered the service as clerk in another division, where the head of the division is a Group B officer, SPOs grade officer. Now, you could have come to SSPOs grade officer. Again, he could have been transferred to another division, which is headed by a Group B SPOs grade officer. Now, at present, he is under the control of a Group B SPOs grade officer. But the appointing authority to him is the SSPOs grade officer, because the highest authority out of these three authorities is SSPOs. Therefore, he is the appointing authority for that government servant in the case of disciplinary proceedings or any other purpose. Mainly disciplinary proceedings as per the CCS CCA rules 1965. You take LHG grade official. You know that LHG once, long back, it was circle cadre, not a division cadre. It was the Director Postal Services concerned was the appointing authority for the LHG cadre official. Later on, at one period, in the middle course, in transition of this recruitment rules change. Divisional head was empowered to be the appointing authority to the LHG grade officials. The LHG grade was made, LHG cadre was made as divisional cadre. Then again now, the DPS is the appointing authority. Therefore, the official was entered service as a clerk, appointed by one SSPOs grade officer. Then he became LHG cadre official. When he became LHG cadre official, the DPS was the appointing authority. When he became LHG cadre official, at that time, divisional head was the appointing authority. At that level, SPOs cadre divisional head was the appointing authority for him when he was promoted as LHG cadre official. Then he now works as LHG cadre official in the same division, continues to be the LHG cadre official. So, now the DPS is the appointing authority as per the changes made in recruitment rules. So, now who is the appointing authority with reference to that government servant? First appointed by divisional head, next promoted as LHG cadre official. At that time, SSPOs as divisional head was the appointing authority. Now he continues to be the LHG cadre official. Now DPS is the appointing authority. Therefore, the highest authority out of these authorities is DPS. Therefore, with reference to that particular government servant, DPS is the director, is the appointing authority. Then one more example you can say. One MTS, multitasking staff. Group D, now it is Group C. Group D staff, MTS, all included in Group C. We will come on later on about classification and all. Group C staff, MTS. Earlier Group D. He was appointed by ASP cadre officer. That is Group B guested officer. ASP cadre officer. When he was the head of the subdivision. In which subdivision he was the MTS appointed by him. So he was the appointing authority at the initial stage. Next comes over on transfer to some other subdivision under the control of inspector of posts. Next, subsequently comes under the control of unit, head post office, HH1 postmaster. Now, when a disciplinary case is to be initiated against him, the question of appointing authority comes for major penalty proceedings. Therefore, who is the appointing authority now? First, he was appointed by ASP, cadre officer. Then, he comes under the control of Inspector POS as MTS. For him, for MTS cadre officials, in respect of that subdivision, as the subdivision head, inspector is the normal appointing authority. Then comes on transfer to a unit, that is HO, at post office, headed by the HH1 postmaster, non-guested. Now the question, who is the appointing authority? HH1, inspector, ASP. Who is the highest authority? ASP is the highest authority. Assistant Superintendent of Post Offices. That particular subdivision there, he was first initially appointed by the ASP. So out of these authorities, ASP is the highest authority. Therefore, appointing authority for him for disciplinary purposes is ASP, not I.Po. or not head postmaster, the present controlling officer. Only ASP cadre officer is the appointing authority. Similarly, when postal assistant appointed by divisional head, Group B or Group A officer, that is SPOs cadre or SSPOs cadre. Then he was promoted by competitive exam as Inspector POS. For Inspector POS, DPS, Director concerned, is the appointing authority. Therefore, for the inspector, who is the appointing authority? DPS is the appointing authority. These are the examples. Now I think we can understand very well from the examples and the definition, appointing authority. In relation to a government servant, you read between the lines, not with reference to particular post. The beauty of the language in these rules can be appreciated if you are really interested, and if you have aptitude to learn the rules or to apply the rules correctly. So the language is very, very beautiful. Next, disciplinary authority. 2G. Definition 2G, that is interpretation. 2G. Disciplinary authority, what they say? Disciplinary authority is the authority who is competent to impose on a government servant any of the penalties specified under Rule 11. What it means? Disciplinary authority means not who is taking disciplinary action like that. Disciplinary authority is a statutory authority vested with the disciplinary powers. Who is the disciplinary authority? Disciplinary authority is that authority who is competent, who is empowered, who is vested with the powers to impose any of the penalties specified under Rule 11. Any, that word you should clearly note. Any of the penalties. That means under Rule 11, we will discuss everything in detail one by one. Rule 11 says the nature of penalties. What are the penalties that could be imposed on a government servant? That is Rule 11 heading, for good and sufficient reasons and as per the procedures herein given, the following penalties can be imposed on a government servant. Not at the will and pleasure or whims and fancies of the authority, the penalties can be imposed. For good and sufficient reasons and as per the procedures outlined, described in the rules, the following penalties can be imposed. That means there are how many penalties? 10. Minor penalties, major penalties. Minor penalties 5, major penalties 5, totally 10 penalties. No other penalty in any other form, any other way can be imposed. There are specified penalties, clearly defined what are the penalties that we will discuss in detail later on. So 5 plus 5, minor penalties 5, major penalties 5, total 10. If any authority is empowered for imposing any of the penalties of these 10 penalties, is defined as the discipline authority. Not necessarily all the 10 penalties, not necessarily all 5 minor penalties. Any one of the minor penalty, even any one of the minor penalty that is censure, if competent, that authority is competent to impose, then he is the discipline authority for that government servant. All the 5 minor penalties, if is competent, then also he is discipline authority. All the penalties, 10 penalties competent, then also he is discipline authority. There is no definition like lower discipline authority, higher discipline authority. Discipline authority. Any one penalty, if you are competent to impose, you are called, you are defined, you are declared as a discipline authority with reference to the particular government servant. For example, if you take, I will give examples. Postal, I can compare another department also, Indian Revenue Service, like that, but our department employees should know clearly. For the exam, competitive exams, aspirants, and for coveted service, coveted posts, aspirants, this will be useful. I think they can make useful. If they read, and if they read after hearing me about this lecture on this topic, it will be very clear, I think. They should be interested, they should show some aptitude in understanding each and every sentence of the rule. Then everything will be okay, and he will be the master in the subject, the rules. Any question, anything, you can answer easily. Therefore, for example, discipline authority, you obtain postal assistant, one division. The appointing authority of that clerk, postal assistant in the particular division is that divisional head. That is maybe SPOs grade, Group B officer, or SSPOs grade, Group A officer. He is the appointing authority. He is also the discipline authority because the divisional head, SPOs or SSPOs, as the case may be, depending on the division. Some divisions headed by Group A SSPOs grade officer, some divisions are headed by SPOs grade officer, Group B officer. Anyhow, he is the appointing authority, he is the discipline authority for postal assistants. SSPOs, SPOs. He can impose all the penalties, all the 10 penalties, 5 minor penalties plus 5 major penalties. He is competent to impose any penalty out of 10 penalties. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Any of the penalties, also all the penalties. He is the discipline authority in respect of postal assistant because of this function and powers given to him. But because he is vested with the powers for imposing all the penalties, he is called discipline authority. That is not the intention of the rule. If anyone is competent to impose only one penalty, censure also discipline authority. But in respect of postal assistance, in respect of a division, there is no other authority other than the divisional head to impose any one penalty or 2 penalties or 5 penalties. Only all the penalties, the divisional head is competent. He is also the appointing authority also. Next we come to another example. Director Postal Services is the appointing authority for the Inspector Post Cadre officer. He is the discipline authority competent to impose all the penalties 1 to 10 can impose any penalty, major penalty, minor penalty, any penalty to the inspector cadre official. The divisional head concerned under whom that inspector is working is also a discipline authority, not appointing authority, but discipline authority. You should note, for postal assistant, divisional head is discipline authority for all penalties as well as appointing authority. But in the case of inspector cadre officials, appointing authority is director, discipline authority for imposing all the penalties is director. Divisional head concerned is also the divisional discipline authority, because he is vested with powers to impose all the 5 minor penalties to the inspector cadre officer. In that way is discipline authority, not appointing authority, but discipline authority. Next, we will come afterwards some interesting cases, interesting examples in our postal department. Generally, as per the principle of natural justice and the rule of law, etc., appointing authority will be generally vested with the powers of imposing all the penalties on the government servants to whom is the appointing authority. But in our postal department, there is a peculiar case that we will discuss afterwards. Appointing authorities not competent to impose major penalties. That we will discuss later on. Some cases, appointing authorities are, for example, inspector is the appointing authority for Group D, that is MTS and postman cadre officials. HSG 2, HSG 1 postmasters are the appointing authorities for postman and MTS cadre officers of his own office. But though they are appointing authority, they are competent to impose only minor penalties. They are not competent to impose major penalties. Of course, as per the rule that we will discuss later, that is, they are competent to initiate major penalty proceedings. They can issue rule 14 charge sheet, major penalty charge sheet. But final major punishment orders cannot be imposed by them. Only the divisional head can impose the major punishment orders to the postman and MTS cadre officials. Though the postmaster concerned, inspector concerned, ASP concerned, or the appointing authorities to the MTS postman cadre officials, they cannot impose major penalties. Thus, discipline authority, we should understand the concept of discipline authority, that's all. Next, one by one we will discuss. We will finish with this. We will continue later on. Thank you.